Hello and welcome everyone. It's so good to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And this is our new version or new edition of this live format where we're going to present, along with our two great researchers, Ryan Chapman, who is a principal incident response and forensic consultant for BlackBerry, and Anuj Soni, principal threat researcher for BlackBerry. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, hey.
It's good to see you here. And also, the question is, what do you have for us? What are you gonna announce us? Because we're here to hear like something cool.
Yeah, so we're here to present on Monti, the group that is using the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the cryptor or encryptor payload of the former Conti crew. We happened upon this while working a case. It's cute to say that we found Monti, but they found us. You know, ransomware announces itself. Hey, you've been encrypted by so and so. So our crew worked the case, and Anuj is part of our threat research team who did some amazing malware code reuse analysis. And so we're here to just kind of present the findings and say like, hey, look, this is silly. And we believe there will be a lot more groups just like this that use these types of tactics through group evolution and or group mimicking or doppelganging, if you will, which is I believe the term we went with in the article. And that's what we're here for.
Nice, nice. That's so nice because we love big announcements and also like we want to hear. We are looking forward to hear about Monty or Monty, however it's called. But why is that name? Like, why it's so weird? And because it sounds like very similar to Conti. Like, is it like on purpose, or what is the origin of that name? Why did you call it Monty or somebody else?
Was waiting to see if Anuj wanted to pop in there because he did some really cool threat intel on it. Well, so at first we were under the impression that this was a mimic, right? Whether it was a mocking mentality to it, like, oh, hey, we're Monty, or whether it was simply a hey, there was a ton of data released between February and March earlier this year, an additional leak, if you will, but a much larger leak of the Conti crew's operations, internal communications, tooling, including the source code, like encryptor, payload, decryptor, all the fun stuff. Recent, and when I say recent, I mean in the past 24 hours, evidence has revealed that this may actually not be a mockery, but rather this may be another part of the evolution of the Conti crew. So basically, ransomware over time, these campaigns, these groups, as we call them, right? They evolve. A lot of people say like, oh, Conti's gone. Well, they're not gone. They didn't go anywhere. Conti as a brand is gone. However, the actors have gone to various other locations. There's some locations we're all familiar with in the threat community. The actors and affiliates and developers who are involved with Conti have moved on to other operations. Some of the ones that are documented and known include Black Cat and Alf. And we've got the Karakurt team, who is an extortion group by trade. So they don't perform encryption, but rather they do the data access and exfiltration. There are a number of groups that we know the Conti former members have migrated to. So in the article right now, by the way, the verbiage that's in there is, hey, they've ceased operations. The brand Conti has ceased operations. So in this case, is Monti just kind of like a joke, as in we're going to steal all of Conti's stuff? Or is it kind of a reinvigoration while some folks decided we're going to go to these other locations? Perhaps there's some of these actors who are advertising now on the dark web, basically going like, well, we're just going to be Monti now. We're just going to throw an M on it, and we're going to do that.
Yeah, I still remember that when the war in Ukraine began, it was such a painful time, and a lot of Conti things just started like leaking on Twitter everywhere. It was source code, some builders. I don't know, Anush, do you remember that? Like some of those like builders league source codes from Conti, and how it's connected also in these terms with Monty, what we are presenting today.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, it is an amazing time to be a malware reverse engineer, right? Because, in years past, generally the closest you could get to understanding the code of an attack tool would be looking at the disassembly, looking at the decompiler output. But with the drama that continuously is unfolding in many of these organizations and operations, we now have insight into leaked internal tools like the builders involved in building ransomware, as well as the actual source code. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of investigate some of these relationships. So as Ryan mentioned, when we started looking at this code, it was pretty clear, even just based on the actual execution within the victim within the customer environment that we were investigating, that the ransom note looked very similar to the Conti ransom notes that we've seen in the past. And literally, it was just that one character difference. Instead of referencing Conti, it was referencing Monti. So in light of the leaks that occurred, it made a lot of sense to try to establish and investigate any relationships between the payload we discovered as well as those leaks that occurred online. And one thing I want to say up front, just so everyone's on page with the terminology I'm going to be using in the next minute or two as I discuss this, there are essentially three types of executables to consider that we investigated as part of understanding the actual generation of the payload we found in the customer environment. So one type of executable is the actual ransomware payload, right? That's the one that most of us probably think about. That's what executes in a customer environment. That's what would actually ransom the environment, that would encrypt files on disk and change the extension and so on. Next is the builder, which I just mentioned. Most ransomware has a builder associated with it. This is something that generally only a select few people within the organization have access to in order to actually build those payloads. So the builder is responsible generally for creating not only the encryptor, but the decryptor as well, which of course would only be provided upon payment. The builder is going to be responsible for configuring those payloads, for adding any embedded public or private keys, for specifying the ransom note, for specifying the encrypted file extension, in addition to other configuration options depending upon the actual ransomware family. And so, keep in mind, we're talking about the builder, we're talking about the actual payload. And finally, the third type I want to mention is what I'm calling the template executable, okay? And you'll see why this is important here in a moment. But the template executable is essentially what the builder operates on, okay? So the builder is going to add those things like the encrypted file extension, the ransom note, and so on, but it needs something to actually embed that information into. And that's where the template executable comes into play. So when you're looking at ransomware and the multiple executables involved, you have to kind of pay attention to all three of those. So when we tried to establish a relationship between this Monti ransomware and the leaks that occurred back in February and March earlier of this year, what we quickly identified was that the file size, in fact, the name locker.exe, the imp hash, the import table hash, which aligns with the functionality of that sample, the compile time, all of those matched the template executable of the version 3 leaks. In other words, version 3, those leaks included an executable called locker.exe. And that was not a functional payload. It was only a template executable. In other words, it still had to kind of fill in the blanks of the actual extension, the ransom note, the embedded RSA public key, and so on. But the sample we found closely matched that template executable, which confirmed at a very basic level that we were looking at a version 3 payload versus a version 2 payload. Now, we wanted to better understand how this payload might have been generated, because the version 3 leaks actually did not include any source code or executables associated with the builder, right? So how is it that this Monti threat actor, how did they actually create this payload that hit our customer environment? Well, you might think, well, the source code is available. They probably just compiled it. But the source code that was leaked was actually for that template executable, not a functional ransomware payload. And so that would have been insufficient. The next idea that came to mind is, well, perhaps these threat actors, the Monti threat actor, had access to a version 3 builder. But we also don't think that's the case. In fact, what we believe is that it's possible these Monti threat actors literally used a hex editor to make changes to the leaked locker.exe in order to produce this functional payload. And the reason we believe that has to do with one of several differences between version 2 of Conti and version 3. Now, there's much more detail about this in the blog post that was released earlier this morning. But what I'll say at a high level is that the version 3 payload of Conti essentially encrypts the ransom note. Okay, version 2 did not. Now, because the ransom note is encrypted, what that means is somewhere also embedded in that payload has to be the key to actually decrypt that ransom note. And based on existing version 3 payloads, we can identify the format of where that information is actually stored. The encryption algorithm used to encrypt the ransom note is called Cha-Cha-8. And I'm going to not get into all the details of that particular algorithm, but what I will say is it involves a key, which you might expect, as is associated with most encryption algorithms. It also includes a nonce, which refers to a number used once, It's kind of like an initialization vector, if you've heard of that. It essentially adds additional variation to the encryption algorithm. The bottom line, however, is that in the payloads we found in the customer environment, there was essentially no key. In other words, it was all 0 bytes and no nonce associated with the encrypted ransom note. And it would be highly unusual for a builder to create such an executable, because most ransomware builders, and this goes for multiple malware families, if there's any sort of random number generation or keys that need to be created for the encryptor or the decryptor, the builder is just going to automatically do that job. It's not going to prompt the user for a random number. And so the fact that there is essentially a 0 byte, all zeros key, as well as no nonce included in this payload indicates to us that it was highly unlikely that it was created by an actual Conti builder. And as such, what's most likely is that the adversary took that leaked locker.exe and manually modified it to include their Monti ransom note.
Yeah, thank you for that impressive explanation. Of course, it requires a lot of research and analysis. You actually stole that question from me. It was one of my questions, but you already answered it. And yeah, that's pretty impressive. But how did you find it, guys? I mean, when? When did you find it? Because okay, today it's September 8th, and some may think like, oh yeah, those guys they just found it yesterday. They wrote like a quick blog post, and here they are trying to catch our attention. But in reality, when it happened?
So a common MO of ransomware operators is to attack during a national holiday and based on the victim organization's banking calendar, as you may call it, right? In this case, it happened to be an attack that occurred during the July 4th holiday, which, by the way, in the United States, July 4th is, we call it 4th of July. It's a celebration of the creation of our country. Yay! And so on that day, there's a lot of barbecuing and a lot of, people meeting up and hanging out and vibing and, just not really paying attention to IT security matters. And that may or may not have been a coincidence, an odd coincidence, but, so the threat actor got in toward the end of June, and then on July 3rd, late on July 3rd, the morning right before, right before the morning of July 4th is when the encryption event itself occurred. So the threat actor was in the environment for 4 or 5 days, and then did all the bad things they wanted to do, accessed whatever data they were going to access. We found over 250 files individually, and technically about 20 other directories that the threat actor may have accessed. Had access to or directly accessed one of those. And then we found a number of tools that they used to actually take the data out. I'm sure we'll get to that coming up. But it was right around that time frame. And at that time, analysis or research, and that research as in like public internet, darknet, whatever you want to call it, reaching out to other researchers, had only revealed there was one researcher who I spoke to directly, and there was also a Twitter posting, or a tweet, as we call it, like tweet. And the tweet basically said, hey, there's this Monti group out there, and there's a screenshot of the ransom note, identical basically to the one that we had identified in our case. Said they've hit around 5 to 10 organizations, heads up kind of thing. And that's linked in our article, by the way. So shout out to that team, Malware Hunter team. Great Twitter account to follow, by the way. And so at the time, it was like, well, what is this all about? And that's when it happened. So it's been about 2 months now.
Right? Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's something impressive. Yeah, and of course, yeah, threat actors they always look for like a better moment, to hit. That remind me also some ransomware families, targeting several institutions in Brazil, especially in the night when all those um, network system administrators are sleeping and all those systems just unattended. And speaking about Brazil, we have so many. International guests with us today from I can see here friends from Argentina, from Germany, the United States as well, and many other countries. So yeah, welcome and thank you for being here with us. Yeah, you can see here also hello from Germany. Yes, and many also thank you and hello and welcome to our program. So a question for you guys: when we think about ransomware, some they just think, oh, should be like a 0 day. So is it like the case of Monty? Basically, how is the initial access? What did they exploit in order to get to the victim's network infrastructure?
So great question. And I think that in the industry, we have this misconception, especially in the media and whatnot, that a top infection vector for ransomware campaigns in general are quote unquote 0 days, right? When in reality, a proper 0 day is not super common as an entry point vector. Now, in the case of the Kaseya attacks, that was a 0 day. Like, whoops, no one knew that was coming, right? In this case, the entry point was a log4j or log4j, if you read it out phonetically, right? Attack that was, it's a known vulnerability, very well known vulnerability called log4shell. And this was in the VMware Horizons application. And the issue in this particular case is that the client was aware, hey, we need to update this bad boy. We're going to pull it offline. We're going to pull this server offline, put it behind the firewall. No one can touch this particular broker. And but then, oops, someone actually brought it online for maintenance purposes, which eventually was going to lead to an update. And unfortunately, a threat actor found it first and said, ooh, look at that. So we call this the log4shell 0 day. By this time, however, it was nowhere near a 0 day, a proper 0 day, because a patch had been out for at least 9 months. It had been out for a while. And this is what we find in many of our client cases working in IR. Our firm, pretty much any other firm out there, I'm sure, will say, yeah, we get a number of cases that end up being unpatched software. So at one point, sure, it was a 0 day, but no, no longer. It was just a situation of not being able to patch it in time. And again, taking that remediation method of saying like, well, we have to fix this. We know that. And then when they go to fix it, like, whoops, it becomes a race condition, and then they lost the race.
Wow. Yeah, just simple things sometimes, which in the end, when unattended, it just brings us so much pain. And thank you also for your comments. And also, we see that, for instance, Ryan is also posting live in the chat. If you want to know more, just go and follow those links. Also, like great information. And we know that threat actors, ransomware threat actors, once inside of the network, they got the initial access. They need to get credentials, right? They need to dump those credentials. So, Anuj, do you have a word about that? How did they dump those credentials? What tools did they use? What makes it interesting, like in terms of Monti?
Yeah, so there are a couple different tools they used to dump credentials. One of them was used to dump credentials associated with the Veeam backup management software. And of course, they also had to dump credentials associated with these systems. I'm actually going to let Ryan first talk about that, because that's, I think, what they did first. And so, Ryan, I'll let you take that one, and then I can back it up with some of the discussion about Veeam.
Awesome. In this case, we have a classic example of a client environment in which we have an endpoint protection mechanism. And the endpoint protection mechanism was not actually on the initial server. So the VMware Horizon was not actually running it, which is how the threat actor most likely was able to remote code execute without having to bypass it, a system first. Anywho, on the other devices, the threat actor tried to drop in Mimikatz, the threat actor's favorite credential dumper, Mimikatz. Everyone knows Mimikatz. And if you don't, just go Google Mimikatz and you'll find a slew of articles on, hey, it can pull what Windows or Microsoft likes to call secrets out of the LSAS process. And the LSA, Local Security Authority within Windows, is basically a structure that in which credentials are stored, right? To keep it pretty simple. Mimikatz has the ability to look into that space, into the memory pages that are assigned to that LSAS process, and basically just pull them out. And even if they are encoded, or as we say, hashed, right? They're not clear text passwords. They can then take those passwords or credentials using Mimikatz or another tool similar to it and just pass those along the network. And we refer to those as a pass the hash or a pass the token or pass the something attacks. Mimikatz was caught by the endpoint protection right away. The EPP in this environment said, no, stop it, right? And the threat actor then just said, okay, well, that's fine. I'll use a native method. So they then switched to dumping the LSAS processes memory, which I personally believe with the task manager, the Windows task manager. So the standard Windows task manager, right? Just Control-Shift-Escape to pop it up, which is your fun short key, by the way. If you're not using that, go try that out. Control-Shift-Escape.
I'm
They
trying
open
it
up the
here.
task
Wow.
manager. Yeah, I love that shortcut. if you have admin privileges, you can simply go to the detailed section where it lists all the processes. You can right click on lsas.exe and choose create dump. When you create a dump using that method, the file name will be lowercase lsas dot and then a capital DMP. That capital DMP, that capital suffix, is typically it's a low fidelity, if you will, indicator, but it kind of tells us that looks like how they did that. I saw it being written to the disk. I saw like everything tells me that's how this was done. So the endpoint protection, or the antivirus, if you want to call it that, says Mimikatz, that's bad. And the threat actor just says, that's cool. You know, Microsoft has a way for me to do this. I'll just do that. And then we eventually actually found a URL in the web cache for IE/edge. And the URL was to Drop Me Files, which is a very common cloud-based file sharing site. And Drop Me Files there's a little link there that showed like this is a very specific link on that website. So, you know, using proper operation security and confirming with the client, I basically just pulled that sucker up and saw like, oh, look, the threat actor had used Drop Me Files. And I'm looking at the screen, right? I took a screenshot. It's in the article. And they basically just uploaded, like literally via the Chrome web browser, nothing special. They just uploaded the client's LSAS file. And then from there, they most likely took it offline and finagled and did fun stuff. I was able to actually analyze that file myself using Mimikatz. You can use the tool called Mimikatz, and you can just analyze an LSAS dump. And I found 4 different accounts, 3 service accounts and 1 admin account.
Wow.
That for which I found the NTLM hashes. We didn't put that in the article yet, but we might as well throw it in there. Not the actual account names, but you know, like, hey, this is how you perform this analysis. So that's one of the ways. And then a really cool way they obtained credentials, I'll fire over to Anuj.
Yeah, so in addition to that, we found, as you may know, ransomware often does try to interact with backups, namely to generally delete them, right? To make it probably a bit of an incentive to go ahead and pay up. And so in this case, one of the tools we found in their tool set that they downloaded to the systems was a credential dumper specifically targeting the VM backup management tool. And even more specifically, it targeted the database associated with VM that stores credentials. It was a .NET executable, and it employed some basic obfuscation for the malware analysts out there. It employed a control flow flattening. But essentially, once you get over that little hurdle, it was pretty clear that its purpose in life was just to go ahead and find that backup database, to interrogate it, to try and pull and then decode or decrypt, depending upon how the passwords are stored, because there are some options there. But it would then try to basically just print out to the screen the encrypted passwords, the decrypted passwords, and then, of course, the attacker can take advantage of that to actually interact with the backup management software. And we were able to pivot using that sample to multiple other samples that we discovered on VT. All of those IOCs are in the blog post as well. At the time of the writing, there was very few vendors convicting those. I think basically like 10 or 15 now this morning. Conveniently, there are many more. But you can check out more details in the blog post on those.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. By the way, when I took a look also on those dumpers and specifically WIM credential, it was very interesting that some of the, let's say, threat researchers from the industry, they associated with another ransomware family called Yanlo Wang. But yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with that. I mean, the code, yeah, might be similar. As same as also there is a certain similarity with Redline Stealer, but you see, it's an info stealer family. It's even like a way different, and it was nice also to see to find in the code even just like PDB path d soft wimp dot pdb. You know, just things, cool things about that. Um, Getting back to Monti and similarities with Conti, there was a manuals also leaked with the information about what to do, how to connect remotely, to have basically like a connection. And in Russian language, they say that сразу после получения систем прав, like immediately when you get system rights, any desk на заброшенных хостах, it means like on unattended hosts. Basically, there's a host on network, nobody's taking care of that. But what about Monty? Is it like the same? Any desk? They use any desk or they use something else?
Thank you for bringing that up. I almost forgot that. That's a critical part to the whole what differs between the former Conti and Monti, at least in our case, right? Just a heads up to anyone at this point, right? We're detailing one incident, a single incident. And these threat actor groups, the people perpetrating, right, the humans who have their hands on the keyboard, human operated ransomware, humor, as I like to call it, which is not humorous, they use affiliate groups and affiliate models. And as such, you may see certain techniques leveraged by a ransomware group, in this case, Monti or Conti. And then in another case, you'll see alternatives and you'll be, well, why are they doing things different? Well, because they are someone else completely, right? An entirely different affiliate group. Anywho, Conti is well known to use AnyDesk. In this case, the first thing they did was install AnyDesk. And the way that they installed it was very, very similar to what we see in other cases. And I love the actual direct live translation review. That was fantastic. Thank you, Dmitry, for that. In this case, there was something new, at least from our perspective, that we have not yet seen. There are tools known as remote monitoring and maintenance, or RMM tools. You probably have one in your organization, whether you use it or someone in your IT department uses it. AnyDesk is a great example of that. It allows remote connectivity and management of machines. That's its purpose. We see these tools leveraged by many different ransomware threat actors. AnyDesk, super common to be used by Conti. Monti, however, used one called Action One. As a note, no diss whatsoever to AnyDesk or Action One. They're fantastic agents. In fact, they work so well that ransomware actors like to use them also. So, nothing against them. Their tools work a little too well. How dare you, right? So Action One is one that I had personally never heard of. And in doing threat research, intel, communicating with cohorts within our industry, working with Anuj and his crews, like, have we seen Action One even used by ransomware groups? We have not yet, and we have found no evidence that it had been used yet. There may have been a case or two. There may be another article we just haven't seen yet, but to us, this was new. And so in all the wealth of data we have from Conti analysis, we had never seen them use Action One. So seeing Action One in the environment to us was like, hey, look, that's different. Action One was deployed in the environment, and the installation was a standard install. It was registered in add remove programs. So if you were to go into something like SCCM right now and look for, AnyDesk for that matter, or look for Action One, and you see it and you realize, well, we don't use that, right? Our IT team doesn't use that. Ruh-roh, you've got a problem potentially, or a rogue user who is just using it. So Action One, if you just Google Action One agent, you'll see the file names in the article. We detailed them, and it's just a standard install, nothing special, but it was used, and that in and of itself was special and kind of set Monti apart.
Wow, yeah, very, very creative, right? Always like seeking for, you know, how to bypass things, how to make it new, something new, to go out of the radar. It's speaking about that. Some we know that use Sigma rules, which is great, and that is about detecting events, like especially events in connection with the exfiltration data. But so is there like any solution, like complete solution for that, or how did Monty exfiltrate data without being detected by those great techniques and tools and rules?
So Monty used a combination of super common tools that we've seen also used by Conti, but also other ransomware groups. WinSCP. Any IT worker right now is like, wait, WinSCP? Yeah, WinSCP, super, super common. They also used Mega Sync. So there's a cloud-based file sharing site that is just loved by ransomware actors. And it is called mega.io.cz.nz. There's a couple different domains that redirect to Mega. But the synchronization agent allows the threat actor to basically say, that folder, I want to upload that folder. And so that was one of the methods they used. A lot of these backups and exfiltration, like the use of drop me files, right? How is that data being exfiltrated? They were literally opening the Chrome web browser and going upload, and they were uploading files. So what does that look like? It's just web traffic, right? It's just web traffic. The best way to deal with those types of things is to have either like DNS level protections or to have network, blocks in place for file sharing, cloud sites, and things of that nature. If you have an approved list of sites, like we use Box, we don't allow anything else, or we use Workspaces, hey, BlackBerry, right? We use one of these things. Anything else, alert on them and find out why they're being used, or for that matter, block them. Can you get away with blocking them? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But a lot of this web-based exfiltration is very, very common these days.
Yeah, that's correct. And I'm personally like very much concerned about those Conti leaks and also new strains appearing because we just heard a few days ago about an attack in Chile. It's publicly known, Cernak. By the way, the strain is not identified yet, but some of Yara rules publicly available match them as a Conti as well, like a Conti family. So in this case, like in Monti case, I mean, what do you think, Anuj? Why it's not just another ransomware strain? Like, who cares? Life is hard.
Well, I mean, from a reverse engineering perspective, which is usually what I focus on and the aspect that I analyze during this case, kind of the word of caution I would say is that as a malware analyst, we're often trained to quickly attempt to classify a sample and understand what family it's associated with. And in this case, if I had just kind of quickly did a search on VT, for example, for the impash, I would have confirmed it's Conti. Most of the .tech session, well, most of the sections in general were identical to Conti payloads. And you might have just gone ahead and kind of checked that box and move on. But the reality is that even this kind of small nuanced difference in how the ransom note was stored, right? I only figured that out with some time and effort. And that led to kind of the discovery, or supported the discovery, that this might actually be a different threat actor that wasn't simply just using the leaked source code and the payloads available there, but was putting in a little bit of effort at least to kind of deploy it on their own and make a name for themselves. So from my perspective, I would say, as a word of caution, I mean, it's important to take a closer look at these samples, even if you believe with high confidence that it's associated with a known malware family, because again, going back to all of the leaks that have occurred in recent years, the Babook builders been leaked. That was June 2021. Yashma, Kronos, right? All these builders and additional source code has been leaked over the past couple of years, which means that people, sophisticated and not, have the ability to create their own payloads and deploy those. And so I think we need to pay close attention to really any discovery, even if it's similar to what we've seen in the past, and see if we can identify differences that allow us to kind of group these threat actors a bit differently.
Thank you. Yes, we are about to finish our session today, but before, I would like to ask you guys, and probably Ryan, you would give us like a good advice. Let's say you were on the enterprise side. You are not like working for BlackBerry, but you're protecting someone like a big organization, enterprise. You know, leaving all the products like apart. What would you recommend, like to big organizations and enterprises, like real things, how to protect your organization against ransomware and Monty specifically?
I think the big things, everything that it boils down to are what I consider security 101 mechanisms and protection methods. And unfortunately, we have a number of groups around the world, like most of them, whose IT budget does not allocate enough money to security, right? So what does that mean if you have the money or don't? Well, the entry vectors, right, are super common. In this case, software exploitation. So you have a better patching schedule, a shorter patching time frame. But you're also not just saying, we have a policy that says software needs to be updated. That's cute. You can have a policy all you want, whatever. Is it being followed, right? Is that you testing and verifying? Speaking of policies, is you have remote systems that are listening on the internet. The threat actors are scanning those bad boys. They're using sites like Shodan and Census to automate their collection of scans that have already been done, right? So what you need to do is pay attention to the top IVs, right? Phishing, remote access, software exploitation being kind of dumped into that. So do you have RDP exposed to the internet? Most clients of ours say, well, we don't have RDP exposed to the internet. Like, yeah, you did. You really do. So verifying those things, understanding the infection vectors, but also understanding that basic things within your environment, and EPP, endpoint protection, by the way, is what I'm referring to there. AV, the next generation of antivirus, right? And then also having some type of EDR, endpoint detection and response. If you have those systems, then you would identify everything that we dealt with in this Monti case installed throughout. Now, keep in mind that this client had an EPP solution. They had an EDR technically, but on this particular host, it wasn't installed, right? Why? I don't know. they're not quite sure why. And that's what it boils down to, is that, and you think, oh, that one organization made a mistake. Everyone is doing this. So having asset management, understanding where your hardware and your software reside, and also keeping in mind that patching doesn't just mean software like programs that you deploy, but it also means your network appliances, things like VMware, right? Like go look at that. Do you have ESX in your environment? Do you have a VPN that you're a VPN? If you have any VPN, like go make sure that's up to date, right? So all those things are security 101 best practices. And we just find that a lot of groups don't have the time or money to do them properly. And then they end up dealing with something like this.
Yes, thank you very much. And Anush, what would you like to add to that? Like how would you protect, let's say, a company if you worked for let's say the enterprise, side?
Uh, Honestly, don't have a whole lot more to say beyond what Ryan said. I mean, it's a very hard thing to do, and again, going back to my discussion of the leaks, it's possible, although I don't know that we've seen it just yet, for all these tools to be customized, right, and to be recompiled and different code added or modified to reduce the efficacy of some of these endpoint detection tools. And so it is a really tough problem that just requires everyone to remain vigilant and to ensure, as Ryan mentioned, that at the bare minimum you are covering those best practices, because you certainly don't have a chance at detecting the more advanced nature of these attacks and the customizations that I think we'll continue to see if you don't have your bases covered.
To
Yes.
piggyback on that, hunt actively in your environment. They're just like Anuj says, they're going to develop these slight deviances that some of these tools and systems will then just not pick up. Your EDR is listening. If you don't have an EDR, go find an EDR. Look at Microsoft Sysmon. It's free. There's some great configuration files out there for free, right? Take the time to install those and look through those logs. Hunt actively through those logs. You will find threat actors if you're looking for them who are bypassing your mechanisms. So that's another. I love that Anuj said that. So
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Yeah, nobody's made of magic. It's always possible to find, to detect, to prevent, to respond. And this is why we are here. And I want to thank you both. Thank you, Anush. Thank you, Ryan, for this great research, this announcement. Also, for providing an excellent research, actionable, available for everyone. It's live. Our blog post is already there. It's blogs.blackberry.com. And there is also a couple of URLs, so you may use them for your live hunting and for any other need, indicators of compromise. So I love those blogs, like really good job, because that's not only about stories, but it's also something contributing to the industry and like real things. So we want to thank you also, everyone, for being with us. Thank you, and we see you in our next edition with new cool findings by threat research and intelligence team from BlackBerry, and we're looking forward to have you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.